Continuing to track the LA fires with the latest numbers, as well as fire weather returning, critical fire conditions in Southern California with no relief in sight. We're going to take a look at the long range forecast in through almost the end of January with very dry conditions on the horizon. I'm ABC 10 Plus Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods looking at our weather impact, where we have these in-depth forecasts on ABC 10 Plus, as well as explainers and weather specials. You can catch our California's dying lakes, as well as California's water future and water wasted. We are going in depth into California's water system and how we deal with the absence of rain and precipitation, or too much of it, how it's stored and how it's transported throughout the state. Let's take a look at the LA fires and the latest numbers. Palisades fires. Now, this was as of about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. It started January 7th. It's up to over 23,000 acres. It's about 14% contained. As far as the EATON fire started as well, January 7th, 14,000+ acres, as well as 33% contained. Now, one little caveat here is containment is just basically where they've been able to secure the fire lines. Now, you may not be seeing active flames or even active damage, but as far as that perimeter, they really need to make sure everything is secure, especially because we have another big fire weather event looming in the next 12 hours or so. These fires started in the same type of situation. A high wind warning going into effect Tuesday morning. That takes us all the way through Wednesday afternoon. Northeast winds are back. Those gusts up to 70 miles per hour. The main impacts, potential for power lines coming down, which could spark a fire, as well as fire danger. And that leads us into this red flag warning with a particularly dangerous situation. Same time frame, starts up Tuesday morning, lasts through Wednesday late in the afternoon into the early evening. This is going to extend a much bigger distance here, all the way into San Diego and the border, into north of Santa Barbara. Gusts up to 70 miles per hour, extreme fire behavior. However, with the particularly dangerous situation, that's going to be just north of Los Angeles, almost into the Santa Barbara area, Montecito area. You can see right along the coastline here where we're going to see some of those strongest winds. And that's where we get into the extremely critical fire weather, where if a fire were to start, it would be nearly impossible to stop. That's what we saw last week. We couldn't get the aircraft up, and so basically it was just all on hand crews that were trying to attack as safe as possible the fire lines, but it was nearly impossible to attack that from the ground. Satellite and radar showing us the setup that's happening once again. We've got the high pressure ridge building in. There's that low moving off to the east. For our Monday, these winds were basically in Northern California. We saw peak wind gusts at about 30 to almost 40 miles per hour. And we saw that thin little line through the upper foothills and lower Sierra, where we saw those gusts closer to about 40 to 45 miles per hour. Now, this is going to start to shift its way southward as we head into our Monday evening, even into our Tuesday morning. Winds really start to back off here in Northern California. So we'll be left with fairly calm conditions, very cold morning lows, though, dropping to near freeze conditions. As far as the humidity in Southern California, this is why we're calling for that critical weather, fire weather developing. Low humidity during the day on Tuesday. We start to pick up those north winds and offshore winds, and that's going to bring our humidity down to about 10 to 15%. And this is what I was saying. It's generally north of the Los Angeles area. Malibu with about 61% humidity. Inland areas, even Long Beach included, at about 30% humidity. Now, during the overnight hours, where we look for that recovery for our humidity, it's still only about 20 to 35%. That's going to put us in that threshold of seeing that red flag warning, as well as particularly dangerous situation because of what's happened. We've got drought conditions down south. We've got the winds. We've got the low humidity and already fighting multiple fires. So you look at the resources that are available as well. It's going to be few and far between that we're going to be able to mobilize into other fires. We've seen this happen time and time again in Northern California, and now we're still dealing with this in Southern California. And here we are in the middle of winter. By Wednesday afternoon, humidity up a little bit, but what we're going to see is that wind is still going to be a factor. It's going to be developing in the course of overnight Monday in through Tuesday. You can see those offshore winds really funneling through here. as we head into our Tuesday morning, mainly north of Los Angeles. Again, this is going to be Simi Valley, San Fernando, even Oxnard getting in on some of those stronger gusts. Heading into the afternoon, they pick up once again. Now, we have a little plume of those winds also from San Bernardino through Santa Ana, where those wind gusts are closer to about 30 to 35 miles per hour. But the big focus area for that particularly dangerous situation is going to be north of where we had those bigger fires break out last week. Here I have the perimeters around the Palisades fire just north of Santa Monica, and then near Pasadena, Altadena was where that EATON fire broke out, and those are going to be the current perimeters there. But these winds are going to be most fierce just north of that area. Moving through the afternoon and evening on Tuesday, we see a little bit of a break. Not much. It's still going to be pretty gusty there in that zone, but then heading into our Wednesday, another little pulse of those winds comes through. It's going to be slightly north of that area, but again, Simi Valley and then just north into Thousand Oaks area, right through all of these mountain areas and canyons. We're going to see those offshore winds, very dry winds. Oxnard still looking at 32-mile-per-hour gusts there, even into Wednesday afternoon, once that red flag warning will expire. Fire risk goes up as well. Same time frame during the afternoon on Tuesday. Once the winds really start to do their job, drying things out, the lower humidity, it will back off a little bit during the evening on Tuesday into early Wednesday, but then it's right back heading into our Wednesday afternoon. So certainly something to watch as we deal with the development of these winds. We've got the high pressure ridge in place. The winds are generally going to be offshore here all the way into our Tuesday evening. High pressure will take over and we will see those winds relax a little bit into our Thursday. But at that point, we've already set the stage, right? So these are Santa Ana winds. A lot of folks have been asking, what are Santa Ana winds? How do they happen? Why are they so dangerous? Well, we've got the high pressure building east of the Sierra, and we've already seen that basically with that setup here. Air pushes down the mountains and is compressed and warm. So that's the initial setup here. So the Sierra is playing an impact in all of this. Then we start to move our way southward. The desert dries the air out further. And then we start to see the offshore development as we basically get that tighter pressure gradient. So the air squeezes through the canyons, creating those strong winds. Here we go, right offshore. And this is basically what we're going to continue to see through our Tuesday and Wednesday. These create hot, dry conditions, very high fire danger and low humidity. Again, offshore winds, we see them in Northern California, Southern California. They're known as Santa Ana winds. So the fire season comparison, this is pretty dramatic here. We've been talking about the absence of big fires in the month of January. The only other one that we had prior to this event was the Thomas fire, ranking in the top 20. And now we've got the Palisades as well as the EATON, which are going to be some of the most destructive fires in California history. So that's what's bringing up the acreage here to over 40,000 acres burned so far this year. 124 fires this year. Compare that to last year. Obviously, these numbers are going to be much, much lower because this is going to be an outlying year for us in 2025 with the Palisades and EATON fires alone, not even accounting for some of the other smaller fires that popped up. Having that emergency go bag has also been a topic of discussion. A lot of folks think they need to have them in the summer and in the early fall, even late fall, before the onset of significant precipitation. But having it in the winter, well, we deal with it with floods, but having that wildfire emergency kit available in the winter hasn't necessarily been something that we normally talk about. So let's go over it again. Survival needs, first aid kit, medicine, food, and water for at least 3 days. That's what some of the officials suggest. Important documents. Do you have proof of ownership so you can get back to your house? They're only letting people that have absolutely needing to get in across those fire lines where they're still trying to do mop up into their homes. So have that proof of ownership ready. You may need it. Insurance and medical information, as well as personal identification and a fire-resistant safe. I don't know if you've been seeing the stories, but some people have been going back to their burned out remains of their homes. They have their fireproof safe, fire-resistant safe. They go in there and they have their valuables. So it's pretty moving footage there, but it does show that when you have those fire-resistant safe, it can actually prevent you from losing some of your precious items. Your Go Bag Ready emergency preparedness kit in your car in case of evacuation. So that's going to include your passport, your important documents, your medication, anything that you need, as well as that water, your food, all of that stuff. You want to make sure that is in your go bag. And remember your pets as well. Have a carrier, an ID tag ready, food, leash, medication, medical records, and toys. A lot of the some of the safety areas, some of those shelters don't accept pets. So maybe just kind of knowing where those shelters might be set up for pets, whether they be small or even the larger animals as well. One other item I will mention. If it's safe to do so, don't park in a garage, because if they shut the power out, if you can't reach up and get that emergency release to manually pull up that garage, it's pretty tough to do so, and then you're left without a vehicle. So some folks, it's not safe to park outside because the wind's coming in so fierce. Just know where that emergency release button is if the power is shut off, so you can get to your vehicle to get out to safety or to a shelter. Now, here's a look at what I was talking about. There's really no relief in sight. Looking almost until the end of January, we're going to be in a likely warmer setup throughout the state and likely drier throughout the entire West. So that ridge of high pressure is just really blocking us from any of this moisture coming through. We are terribly dry through at least the middle end of January, which is going to leave us with pretty dry conditions here. Looking at the drought monitor, here's where we started at the beginning of the water year. Again, in California, it starts off October 1st of last year. We'll run through January 30th of this year. And we were looking abnormally dry through a lot of the state, a little bit of moderate drought here in the southeast corner of the state, but nothing too alarming. We had two pretty good back-to-back water years. Now fast forward to where we stand, and Northern California has fared pretty well. That bodes well for summer conditions and serving the state with water, but it does not bode well for Southern California, which is really dry right now with more drought growing because, again, you get a weather setup like what we've had. And that's going to elevate that fire danger pretty quickly here. So our drought severity and coverage index is up to 108 right now, with some of the drought conditions growing throughout Southern California. And you'll note all the way from Los Angeles through San Diego, severe drought growing, as well as extreme and severe drought growing in that southeast corner again of California. Look at the water year so far. It is a stark difference from Northern California to Southern California. The color contours really depicting how dry it has been. Northern California above average for many places, whereas Southern California, and we've been seeing this, growing abnormally dry conditions, virtually no rainfall in Southern California. In fact, taking a look at the numbers here, Eureka, 12th wettest start to the water year, whereas downtown Los Angeles is the second driest. Los Angeles Airport, it is the driest start to the water year. Taking a look at Palm Springs, second driest start to the water year, only because they got a trace of rain. Otherwise, it would be the driest start. And San Diego, it is the driest start to the water year as well, with 0.14 of an inch of precipitation. So looking at those deficits continuing to grow, this should be our wettest month of the year in January. That's not to say that we can't pick up steam in February and March, but once we get past March, it's really slim pickings as far as the atmospheric rivers coming through, delivering the well-needed precipitation. So here's a look at the building a water year, and this really depicts the timeline. The fall rain usually starts in October and November. If it doesn't start during that time frame, it does not mean we'll end up with a dry year. In fact, last year, it really didn't pick up until January. But 50% of our annual precipitation will fall in December, January, and February. Now, March can be kind of the miracle March is what we call it in California. But if things really don't pick up in February, it is not looking good, because once we get through April, it is sun, it is dry, and we go all the way until almost that following October until we start to see things picking up. Now, in the background of all of this, we've been talking about this. La Nina has been happening, and that typically favors a wetter than average Pacific Northwest through extreme Northern California. And that's kind of how things have been playing out, whereas Southern California, drier than average. Again, this is falling in line with what we normally see in a La Nina pattern. That's not to say that that's how things are going to end, but it is kind of favoring that pattern. As far as our really long range forecast, just everything fizzles out. There's a lot going on in the Pacific. It hits that high pressure ridge. It absolutely just dries out. Even the Pacific Northwest is struggling to bring in any precipitation right now. So really from north to south, we are going to be dry here, it looks like, through much of January. Now, the 90-day climate outlook is starting to favor back towards that likely wetter scenario for Northern California through the Pacific Northwest, and drier continues through the desert Southwest and parts of Southern California, again, favoring more so in line of what we would see in a La Nina year, and likely warmer, again, pretty much in that same area, likely cooler through the Pacific Northwest. We're kind of in that equal chance of warmer, drier, cooler, wetter for Northern California. So a lot to still track here through the end of our wet season. Our forecast, by the way, for Northern California is still going to be quite cold for the mornings. We're in the teens for the high country, 40s for afternoon highs. In the foothills, we'll be in the 50s and 60s. As we move along the coast, highs will be in the 60s on the warmer side here. Heading into the middle of our work week, highs in the 60s, but those lows will, that's going to get our attention, in the 30s for the next several days. For the next 5-day forecast for the mountains, highs will be in the 40s after morning lows in the teens and 20s, 50s and 60s for the foothills. But you're seeing this trend continues. No precipitation out there from the coast through the valley and into the high country. For the 3-day forecast, we've got dry conditions, highs in the upper 50s to right around 60 until we get to the weekend. A little weather system kind of pulses through here, brings us a slight chance of a few snow flurries on Saturday for the high country, but overall it's just going to be a little pulse of colder air coming through. Lows will stay in the 30s, so we've got some chilly mornings ahead. Otherwise, it's all about the sunshine, dry weather, and the continued dryness that we'll be tracking throughout much of California through the month of January.